How is it that John Carpenter's The Thing has stood the test of time and stayed as impressive as ever, even after more than 40 years? Timing, circumstance, and arguably the greatest alien movie of all time kept this film from getting its flowers once before. But we're certainly here to remedy that. Welcome, listener. Now, you look like a person who knows how to tell who's who. So perhaps you can help us as we discuss a film based on an older film, which was based on a novel, but not the film that came afterward with the same name, but isn't really a remake, but more like a prequel. And also not the video game or the definitively superior Pingu edition. You get that right. Now, well, let's jump into the freezing cold as the Aussie gets warmer. Marvel at Kurt Russell's beard. Consider What the Dog Doing. Join our friends on the creepier side and join me, who believes I am still him, while it's entirely possible that I am no longer me, but believe so deeply that I am still me that I am incapable of telling the difference. Then again, maybe that's what I want me to think. Well, until proven otherwise, my name is Kay or Keegan or perhaps something entirely different. But you know what? I'm something of a host myself. But, joining me today is a man who may not be the man I think he is until he proves himself not to be an imposter of the man I think he may be. But there's only one way to truly tell. Hey, Nav, how you doing, buddy? How you doing? You all right? You all right?
It's 2:00 in the morning, and that was too much for me.
That's not the question. I need to run a test. All right.
What's the question?
What is West Side Story?
Awful.
Clearly, this man is an imposter of the highest order. But since he's here, he might as well stay. Nav, would you like to talk to the people for a little bit? Now that we've run our test, we know that you're an alien, but you're articulate, so it's fine.
It's good enough. Welcome, guys. Yes, I'm Naf. I'm really excited to be here once again. What are we? Episode 61 now, so that's pretty exciting.
Look at us. 61.
Still
Damn,
alive,
we made
baby.
it past 2. Look at us. And
episodes, not listeners.
Oh shit. Well, that depresses me a little bit, but we are joined by the master of horrifying recommendations, the loyal royal who's ready to broil. They may be who they say they be, but the real be is the things that made us along the way. We're joined for the second time by the one, the only Chase, also known as Forward into the Black. Please introduce yourself, my friend. So happy to have you back.
It's me. I'm the Thing. I'm going to kill all of you.
And I will thank you for it.
Yes.
And
yes. All my tendrils will engulf you, and I will just assimilate into all of you.
Literally, the best flirting I've heard in my entire life.
8:21 in the morning. I can't get horny now. But
there's no time like the present.
There's no time like the present. Truly.
No, thank you guys for having me be here to talk about John Carpenter's second masterpiece, The Thing.
That is correct. And we're very happy. Now, Chase, I will say you haven't quite taken my ability to feel the snow fall on my shoulders. You took away rain from me, which is really big for an Arizonan. But I will say I'm glad that I can still go to Telluride and have feel joy. So thank you for that.
I figured I'd give
fear
you
next season.
One bit of reprieve before we dive back into traumatizing you, sending you to therapy.
Good, just like my family. Cool.
Yeah.
But be careful, Chase. Movie. You got to be careful though, because I don't know if you've heard the stories about what Kay did to his mum after all the trauma she caused.
Oh, I was wondering if there's is she in a bag somewhere?
Well,
close enough.
You could say that. So
no.
She lost to the big C. Yeah, it's the crocodile down by my house. Nah, I'm just playing. It was cancer. Watch me do a handstand and just.
The fact that line is from The Good Place will never not.
I love that. I love that line for The Good Place. It kills me every time, and my mom. So now, but Neff, as a reminder that you can find One with the Films on every podcasting platform of choice. Did you know that? Did you know that they could do that?
I knew it.
Well, did you know that as well? You can find us live and on demand right here. Not today. Well, we are live, but not in the way that we typically mean. But in general, if you're in the live chat, please feel free to join the conversation. We always love hearing from you and listening on demand. And if you're not doing that, don't worry, because we can't really complain about it anyway, and we love you just a little less. And that being said, Nav, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what we're doing here today?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, today on a special not live episode of One with the Films, it's still a premiere, so if you are watching along, please feel free to leave comments. We read all of them. Sometimes they break our hearts, sometimes they make us happy. It's a bit of both. It's like Chase's movie recommendations. That being said, we're doing an episode of the weekly watch list today, baby. So that's what happens when a bunch of friends with unique and wonderful taste in films have tried too hard for too long to finally share and discuss their favorite films with one another. And if you've been around for a while, you already know the shtick. However, for the uninitiated, the idea is that for every episode, at least one person is watching the chosen film for the first time. It's all about giving a space for creators to share the art that matters most to them and give them a platform to show us all why. So if you like listening to a bunch of nerds geek out, force each other to watch, and then discuss their favorite films for the very first time, this is the place to be. So you can feel free to follow or subscribe. You can send us to your friends. And if you like, you can activate notifications so you never miss a new episode. And of course, we're on all of your favorite socials as well. So links are in the description below. And with all that in mind, Chase, you dropped a spoiler before, but hit me with it again, man. What is a brilliant film that not enough people have seen?
The brilliant film that not enough people have seen, and I think it's just because it's lost to time, is the 1982 horror sci-fi masterpiece, John Carpenter's The Thing. And I've loved this movie since I first saw it, as a kid. Yeah. And it's one that sticks with you for a very long time. I am curious
too. I want to dive into your experience with this film as well, but I'm wondering, do you reckon you could tell me in one sentence why you chose this film specifically to share with us?
Why I chose it was, as I said before, I wanted to give you guys a breather before my next selection of film, even though it's not quite a peaceful breather, but a sentence as to why this film, over the hundreds, if not thousands of horror films out there, is that I think that The Thing is an infinitely rewatchable horror film.
Yeah.
That's a great, concise way of putting it. Yeah.
It's a great pitch. It's funny, every episode we challenge people to put it in kind of one sentence, and people actually constantly outdo my expectations with a one sentence pitch. I'm like, okay, cool. I'll fuck with that.
It's like a sold moment. It's definitely.
Yeah. I'll buy it.
Yep. Absolutely.
And Kay, I'm curious from you first, because I know you've done the whole film school drivel, but is this something that you had come across? You hadn't seen this.
This was never covered in film school. Horror often, it probably will change in the next coming years, but horror often was not really talked about in film school much. Now they might talk about they would much rather talk about something like Come and See than to talk about something like The Thing. That they might be, you might catch your professor before class and you're you're just setting up and saying, I just watched The Thing. And then you would have a discussion about it, but it would never be covered.
Yeah. And
or it'd have to be a specific class.
And actually coming through and watching it this time around, were there any kind of surprises for you? Or did you feel that you kind of knew the story?
I'll bring it up a little bit, because we're going to talk about the ending and stuff, but there were certain elements of the film that I knew, again, as you and I both watched video essays and shit like that. So there were certain scenes I had seen broken down, and stuff like that. But I always assumed some of those scenes were the ending. And then if there's 30 more minutes of the movie, and I'm I didn't, how? Yeah. What do you follow up with that? Yeah. But I think the two things I remember about The Thing, when I first heard about it, to answer your question, I obviously knew that it was a John Carpenter piece. Like I was like, is it John Carpenter, or Wes Craven that did it? I just knew it was one of the two. And I knew that it was generally considered to be, for a while, it was one of those things where I knew that it just simply was a remake of like a movie from the 50s. And I remember my grandfather at some point talking to me because I don't know, we were talking about an idea and he was pitching to me like the story of the thing. And I was like, oh, that's actually really creepy and really kind of cool. And then I remember hearing about it, and I always thought that for some reason, and obviously I look at like the critical stuff, I just remember people being like, oh, they didn't like the actual thing.
Yeah.
And it was only more so in like recent eras where I feel like the discussion around this movie has changed. And a lot of people considering this to be a horror classic, and we'll get into as why. But how about you, Naf? Like, and you obviously did a huge watch this week. Again, you and your we were talking about video games off mic before, but Nev, you really do like to try to make sure you get a 100% on life, don't you? Like you try to make sure that like when especially cinematically, you're like, I need to make I don't want to just watch the one film. I need to watch the other films that this film spawned off of and play the video game.
Yeah. So Chase, you sent me down a rabbit hole with this one. So I watched The Thing, John Carpenter's version, and then I went back and watched The Thing from Outer Space. And then after that, literally a few hours ago, I watched The Thing from 2011. And then about an hour ago, I watched Thingu, the Pingu version of The Thing, which is like a 1 minute
which is
stop motion.
As hell.
Have you seen Thingu?
I have heard. We're talking the Newt Pingu thing.
Yep.
I have heard of it. I've not seen it.
I'm linking this.
I'm very curious how you felt about the 2011 thing. Because while we're not discussing that film in particular, that film is...
It's so interesting, and I was very much excited to hear Naf's take on that one too, because I watched a video last night, somebody breaking down.
Was it Morbid Twos?
Probably.
She looks like Mary Elizabeth Winstead a little bit.
I don't think it was her. It wasn't her video, but I'll look up hers as well.
So it's interesting. That there is, I actually just finished writing my Letterboxd review for it before. One thing helped my appreciation of The Thing from 2011 a lot more, and it was talking with Tate, Star Wars fact guy, just before going into watching it, because I did think it was a remake, and then just in random conversation with Tate said to me, like just paraphrasing, like it's like a prequel. And a lot of people like slam the CGI and it doesn't feel as like real as the original because you don't have that. But there was lots of studio meddling as to like why like the CGI was studio mandated. And then I ended up doing a lot of deep dive into the making of that movie as well and seeing how plagued the production was. And it literally turned the director off making movies. For I think a few years, and then he came back and did a film called The Forgotten Battle. It's on Netflix. That was apparently quite well reviewed. Ooh. And the special effects team for this said that they got like, it was like having postpartum depression going and watching the film, and all of their work had been erased. And so there was like this anger, but also this kind of like, these guys actually set out to do something kind of special. And you can kind of see it. You can see it. You can see that it's been torn apart by the studio. But there is actually, I think that the
kernel of the idea.
It comes from a place of love. So like I'm watching and I'm going, I know that the stuff that's happening here that is actually going to enhance my watch of The Thing the next time I go back to it. Like there is I'm getting context for stuff that I didn't have before. And that's cool. Also, in the way of like when we did 2001 A Space Odyssey, I watched 2010, the year we made contact. And I think in the same sense, you don't need to watch The Thing 2011 to enjoy the Carpenter version, and you don't need to watch 2010 to enjoy 2001. Like arguably, these follow-ups aren't necessary. They give answers to some questions that some people will like those answers and other people will not. But all in all, of the three movies that I watched, the 2011 version of The Thing is my least favorite. But there's also so much I love about it because having seen the other two first, this one takes elements of both. You have like homage to like the old professor in the first film. He's like here essentially. And I was telling Kay on the phone yesterday, I'm like, I watched the first film and my headcanon was like, I know these guys are all American, but this actually feels like this is what happened to the Norwegians. And then now that the Carpenter film starts and takes off, like if you just imagine that they're the Norwegians, it's like one complete story, sort of.
It's just a Hunt for Red October vibe of like it's of like they're speaking English, but it's supposed to be Norwegian.
And then we get to the thing, and I was like, oh, we've got English speaking people, so are they going to do that? And it's like, nope. We had a couple of American scientists come in and work on the Norwegian base, and you have characters that don't speak English, and that ties in like the credits rolling for the Thing 2011K is the opening of the Thing 1982. Like it happens during the credits. And I was like, I love that. So, long story short, I liked it. It's not perfect. It's a lot. There's a lot that
but
it
you
does
have
that's just
empathy
like,
for where it came from.
Yeah. I appreciate the effort that went into it. And what I would love to see is a director's cut because there are insane amounts of puppetry and practical effects in action that literally were, think like Tom Holland's Spider-Man suit on set that they just digitally replace. It's like that kind of vibe. So yeah, and you can see it. So that's disappointing. But you've seen it as well, Chase?
I saw it in 2011, and
did you hate it?
As someone who, I didn't hate it. It takes a lot for me to like hate a film. It was just one of those things. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's like you see it there. You see that like they were trying to do something, and it just didn't pan out. And the cast, there's no reason that cast should have, you know,
swapped
the movie.
The cast is
Mary
great.
Elizabeth Winstead is incredible in everything she's ever done.
Tormund Giantsbane,
and it's just like there's like it's not a remake, and I think a lot of people went into it thinking it was going to be a remake, and that you're going to see Mac again, and you're going to see Childs, and it's like that's not the movie.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those things like what you said, and it's like you can, you know, when you get that taste of like the studio wanted this to be a certain way, and you can kind of taste it. And for me, like that doesn't necessarily ruin a movie. Like I get why the studio would say something. I think like, you know, we're all Star Wars fans. We know like that people have that feeling of Rise of Skywalker, but I'm also like, no one remembers that Revenge of the Sith is all studio meddling. Like that was all 20th Century Fox saying, George, calm down, please get this movie finished. And I think, you know, it's like, it's not necessarily a curse on a film to have the studio meddling, but oftentimes you do get stuff like the 2011 thing where it's like you took what could have been even a cult classic follow-up to an already cult classic movie, and you squashed that.
It actually has those bones. Like it really does. And like we said, it's got a great cast. That helps a lot. And yeah, like there's so much in it. And I think, I don't know how the film was marketed, but I feel like it would have been a cool experience going in, going, they're going to remake this and I'm going to hate it. And then to sit down and be like, wait, it's context. It's like the other side of the what? Because they do kind of set it up with like Joel Edgerton being the kind of new Mac. Like it feels like that's where it's going to go, and it's just it's not. And it does this really cool thing where it's kind of homages a lot of stuff from the first film, and it has a lot of similar themes and a lot of similar kind of story beats, which is cool. You know, down to like the ending being pretty much like the same. But I did see that the ending was something that was completely revamped. They were working on the film up to like hours before release. Like it, I saw that they had some scenes that were shot like a week before release that are in the film.
It's the 2011, and again, I saw it in 2011 and I only saw it once. It's one of those things that when you have something like John Carpenter's film that is so special, that there's very few movies that are like The Thing from 1982. Like what it does, and we'll obviously talk more into it, but what it does with the horror genre is, I would say, unprecedented, and I don't think has been rivaled since.
I would agree.
Because a lot of horror films tap into dread and terror and isolation and all sorts of feelings, and very, very few movies tap into paranoia and trust as a element of horror, and the lack of trust that scares you.
It's like you don't have any sense of safety at all. In some senses, you go and watch a horror film and you kind of know, like, my main character's probably going to survive. It'll be tense, but they're probably going to come out the other side okay. Unless you're watching The Terrifier. But, like, there's that sense, and that's just not here. It's like, okay, this is mental. But,
one of the things that I do love, one of the things I do love about The Thing that we could definitely talk about and kind of segue into.
Yeah, we haven't even gotten to the fun facts yet, and so but continue.
Yeah, from the opening scene in the helicopter. Well, after the UFO, the opening scene of the helicopter to the last scene of Mac and Childs. Nothing is right about this movie. There's not a single moment where anything feels right. Like, the opening scene is a helicopter chasing a dog and shooting at it. And it ends in the most unsettling way. And it is from the opening scene to the very end that nothing feels right. Everything feels off. And I think it's just one of those things, like, you don't ever get that moment of like, oh, this is fine. And like, oh, this is just the break. No, it never stops. And I think that's just one of the...
To Kay's point, which I'm sure we're going to dive into in a moment as well, it's like, these days you won't get something like that. People are so desperate for answers. Like, this would be torn apart on TikTok if it came out today. It'd be one of those like plot holes and they don't answer this, and it's like, shut up, just breathe.
Unless it was made by A24, then it would be like everything that's ambiguous about it would be like, genius, it's the best thing ever made. I think that the scene with the goat, who cares? It's a metaphor. Like, it's sort of a like.
Talking about A24, we're talking about Love and Thunder.
Oh, true. You're right, Johnny.
Before we do jump into fun facts, I am curious, Chase. What was like? Where did you find this movie for the first time? Like, what was your experience coming to this film?
My dad showed it to me when my dad and I, the things we used to watch, like, on the weekends when I was very young, was we would watch Mystery Science Theater 3000. Because that was new, and like, we were watching it as it was coming out, on like, I think it was Sci-Fi, then Comedy Central, then Sci-Fi, and I think it got picked up by HBO at one point. But we would watch that, but we'd also watch creature features. So that was like, Creature of the Black Lagoon, The Wolfman, The Mummy, all that stuff. And then this was the early to mid 90s when we were doing this, and so we were definitely watching a lot of the 80s horror, which I have, like, in my mind coined as wet horror, because everything is glistening and shiny and wet in the 80s.
Yeah, I get you.
And so we would watch things like Reanimator and stuff like that. And then he eventually showed me The Thing, because it was just like, it's one of those things that, like, like, we would watch movies I was definitely way too young for, but this was one of those things he was like, oh, we should watch The Thing. And then also another one of John Carpenter's films, The Fog, that, is one of my dad's favorites. And that, I think watching all those creature features when I was like in elementary school, like, really spawned off like the thing that why I love horror films, why I've like grown in this genre and stuff like that. So that's why, and it's a film that I have consistently come back to. And it's a film, like I said in the beginning, I think it's a film that's infinitely rewatchable, but I also think it's a film that 5 years from now, watch it again, because you will forget just about everything in the movie. You will understand, the highlights, when the monster moments happen, you'll remember that, but you're going to be like, when they're doing the blood test, you're like, oh God, who is it? I forgot who it was. And it's moments like that where if you just take a break from this movie and come back in a couple of years, it's still just as like unsettling.
Hell yeah.
You're so right.
Yeah. And I'm actually really excited to come back to it again at some point too. Again, after also having watched all the others, I'm like, I want to go back to this and watch it again, like, now. But what do you reckon, guys? Do we jump into some fun facts? What do you think? I
want to hear your fun facts.
All right. Well, here we go. So, of all John Carpenter's films, this is his favorite. Was it because Kurt Russell spent a year growing out that glorious mop and beard? Maybe. But this film is so
why it's
iconic.
mine.
Well, yeah, I get it. You've clearly modeled yourself after Kurt Russell.
I gotta do it.
But this film is so iconic that it's become a tradition in British Antarctic research stations to watch this film as part of their midwinter feast celebrations that are held every June 21st. It's like a thing.
That's awesome.
You work on the station, you watch it.
Oh, it's a thing?
I actually didn't mean that.
Thing?
Oh my god.
I know you didn't. That's why it's funny.
Unlike the film which it is adapting, released in 1952 and having done quite well at the box office, both this version and its continuation 30 years later were both considered to be box office flops. The 1982 John Carpenter directed film had a budget of $15 million and only grossed $19.9 at the box office million. After its release around the middle of 1982, on the same day as Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, the original theatrical release. Travesty. And while it currently sits at 149th on the highest rated IMDb films list, it was actually nominated for no Academy Awards and was actually nominated for a Razzie. That was for Worst Score by Ennio Morricone. And this is an Oscar-winning classmate of a little-known director, a little-known director that he collaborated with on a small movie called A Fistful of Dollars, and that's Sergio Leone. And another fun fact about Ennio, he took some of the music that he'd composed for this film, which I'll remind you earned a Razzie, and he used it for the score when he was hired for The Hateful Eight with Quentin Tarantino, and for that, he won his only Oscar. Ironic. As stated earlier, the film is actually based on a classic short story titled Who Goes There, and that's by John W. Campbell Jr., which was adapted first in 1952 before being adapted again by Carpenter in the 1980s. The film features creature and prop work by Rob Bottin, who practically lived at the studio while trying to craft the perfect props and was eventually diagnosed with exhaustion and admitted to hospital to recover. He went on to be nominated for 2 Oscars and then to win for 1991's Total Recall, and he worked on films such as Legend, which we watched on the podcast as well, Seven, RoboCop, and Mission Impossible. And while we all know Keith David now, this was in fact his first credited feature role. And it kicked off a career that continues today, even 42 years later. The film was shot for 3 months across 6 sound stages in Los Angeles and some sequences being shot in British Columbia. And with how iconic this film is, there are countless fun facts that have come up over the years. And these are just a few. And as you can tell, we're 30 minutes in and we haven't gotten to a discussion about the film. We've just been talking about all of this other stuff. The lore on this one is deep. But do either of you have anything you want to add?
Before Chase has probably got numerous, but one thing I want to mention about the release of this film, because I was curious as to why, when I started to hear this film was a flop or critically panned, I was like, why? Obviously, now we think about this film and it's again, to me here that the thing, and having watched the film, I'm like, what film did people see? This is incredible. And then I realized why this film didn't do great at the box office, which was because E.T. released 2 weeks earlier. And that obviously not many people were, after seeing this very wholesome, beautiful masterpiece. In that film, back in those days, for all you youngins out there like me who didn't know this was a thing, movies could stay in the theaters for years. A movie could almost just never leave if it was continuing to make money, and which is crazy to think about now. And so E.T.
It just would have swallowed it all up, eh?
E.T. I think was in
you go back and watch it again and again.
A year. Yeah, E.T. was in theaters for at least close to a year.
Yeah,
and it was the highest grossing movie of its day. Nobody was keen to go see a paranoia filmed gross out horror that still has some of the most grotesque sequences ever made at that time, when no one had seen anything like that ever. So it definitely was panned because of that, which obviously now is one of the reasons why people love it. But just, it was the wrong time, simply put. What do you think, Chase? To not only that, but then your facts.
I don't have any facts about the film that like weren't already covered, but more to like, why did it fail? And it's something that I've definitely noticed going back and seeing like a lot of movies from this time, like the early 80s, is when you look at the landscape of movies around the thing, like you guys brought up E.T., and Blade Runner, where it's like, yeah, like these were very successful films. Blade Runner is a fairly cerebral film, but very much more just an atmospheric masterpiece from Ridley Scott more than anything. When you look at the thing, and it's funny that you brought up A24 because there's a lot of this movie that feels very A24, very neon. That if you take away the 80s gross out special effects, you could release this movie today as an A24 psychological paranoia film. And it works perfectly. And when you look at what John Carpenter had released 3 years prior, Halloween, like totally different vibe. This is and Halloween had preceded or succeeded Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where horror at this time was very much about the slasher. It was very much about the lurking monster that is chasing you. And in some instances, when you have something like Alien, right, that came out another 3 years earlier, is you're not worried about Ripley, you're not worried about Dallas, you're worried about the alien, and the thing. The alien's kind of not concerned. It's just kind of who is it inside of. And it uses different elements that just were not being used at the time. And that's what people were expecting out of their horror films at the time. And I think it's just one of those things. It's like, this is not the landscape that people were in. I think it's one of those things that you look at something like Terrifier today, and it's kind of like this like resurgency of the like gratuitous slasher film, because we have been getting our Get Outs and our Hereditaries for years now, and I think people want that return to form in a way that's why Terrifier is doing so well. But it's just in the early 80s, like that just wasn't the landscape, and it came out at a time, again, stacked up against two of the greatest films in American film history. And it was doing its own thing. It was John Carpenter was being very, very different with his film and wanted to tell a very different story. It is an unfamiliar setting. It is a very weird film. But we could talk about kind of like what his inspiration of Alien and how that pulls into the thing, and just kind of just the way it's shot, the way it looks, and all of that. But it's just one of those things. Like I love the thing because of all of these reasons. Because, like I said, like no movie really I'm sure there is a movie that takes great inspiration from the thing, but no movie has really replicated what this movie does since then.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned around like Alien and the inspirations coming from that too, because one of the things that I saw with the remake is they wanted Mary Elizabeth Winstead's character. They like the studio had mandated like a female lead, and the director was like, "Look, I'm cool with that, but I got to do it kind of my own way. I don't want to make her like stereotypical, like just random lady that's shoved in here." And he took a lot of inspiration from Ripley to put together Mary Elizabeth Winstead's character, which I think worked really well. It's really cool. You even have scenes of her running around with a flamethrower. It's sick. But yeah, I am actually really keen to get into our talking points for this episode as well, because there's a lot to get into. So, Kay, do you want to take us through spoilers and then we'll dive in?
Of course, absolutely. And so just for those who haven't been around the block with us before, some of you have, and you already know the deal, but nonetheless, before we go any further, all these conversations are not spoiler free. We're not necessarily doing a play-by-play, but we're talking about the film with the expectation that you've already seen it. It's always cool to go and watch the film and check back later, but even if you haven't seen the film, chances are we'll convince you to finally make that leap. And given the fact that we're about half an hour in already, you probably are already pausing this to go and watch this film, you sly son of a bitch. But even if you haven't seen the film, you can still have a good time. But if you want to know what film to watch in advance so you can come in prepared for next week, Links are in the descriptions for all the socials, so check us out there. And if you listen all the way to the end of today's episode, we'll also be revealing our next film and guest right here. But without further ado, let's fucking get into it, guys.
Hell yeah. So let's open with the opening of the film. This is one thing that you brought up earlier, Chase, how nothing feels kind of right in this film. And that is one of the most shocking things, is how this film opens. And I know, Kate, like the opening in particular really stuck with you. And I have some thoughts on this too, but I would love for you to kick us off. Walk me through your feelings when you press play.
Well, absolutely. So this movie begins, and again, we're talking about a film that a lot of people like, and a lot of people that, or at least now, like again, a lot of people have talked about, and there are a lot of elements of this film that I did know about, like the blood scene, and there was a fair amount of
one of those things.
This was not talked about at all, and I think that that's why it stuck with me as much. Because also, here's the thing, and we'll get more into this later about why I want to give John Carpenter all the flowers in the world. He takes we debated different titles for this film, and one of the ones I thought about, which was John Carpenter really said, fuck save the cat, I'm gonna shoot the dog. And the whole thing is like, this movie starts out, you see Antarctica, beautiful landscape, you see a dog running and a helicopter. And a part of you is like, oh, is the dog chasing something and the helicopter's en route chasing whatever the dog is
it does
chasing?
Bring up a lot of
like
questions, it's right? Like it's
hunting?
Are they hunting together?
But it starts off innocent. Like that, like at the beginning, like you're thinking, oh, at least where my head was at was, oh, this is kind of cool. They're establishing the vibe of this station crew.
Yeah.
And then I hear a gunshot. But I'm like, they can't be shooting at the dog. And then I see that they are shooting at the dog and then like taking grenades and throwing them down. And it's like, we're not even 5 minutes into this movie. We're not even like, this is how we're starting. And then not only that, follow that up with also one of the dick moves of the film, which is Kurt Russell ruining the chess computer for all of the other crewmates. Like, bro, that wasn't yours. Other people want to play chess. Like, what are you doing? Tossing your whiskey into the goddamn computer I went, wow. Which begs the question, how many times he's done that?
Literally, how many takes you reckon? But it's interesting.
Well, not even takes. I'm talking about like the character. How many times has he done this? Like every time they come back, they're like, well, we have to go get McCready a new computer because he probably fucked with this one.
Yeah.
I love the chess scene. I really love the chess scene because when you rewatch the movie over and over, you definitely will notice things about certain characters and their behaviors. But the thing about Mac and the chess thing is he is going to end up playing chess with the crew on the station, and his solution is the same solution at the end of the movie. His solution to the chess game when he is losing and he realizes he's losing, he destroys it. And he's like, there's no point to this. It doesn't matter if I win or lose this game anymore. And he destroys the computer. He pours his whiskey into the computer and you see all the sparks come out. And what does he do at the end of the film?
He blows up the station.
Sets the entire station on fire and blows the whole thing up.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Because it's funny you're talking about the chess.
But this is the thing, is what John Carpenter does so well is he takes tropes almost that he's established with like stuff like Halloween. And obviously it's like there wasn't a ton of films that he'd done previous to this, but nonetheless, Halloween is such a touchstone in horror filmmaking that it's like he took all those tropes and is like, I'm going to break those tropes.
It's like Wes Craven in Scream.
Yeah, it's like Wes Craven knowing that he's done all of this, like taking something and still making something original. But then what I love is the fact that, the Norwegians are in the end of the movie. The end of their movie is what's happening. And the fact that they get out and they shoot one of our guys. And I've heard arguments from people being like, well, this movie doesn't set up any of the characters. And at first I was like, we don't know anybody. I'm like, they're just shooting this guy. I don't know who this guy is, but I'm like, but that's part of the brilliance.
Yeah.
As the movie goes, like, I didn't know here sitting in 2024, I didn't know you could do that.
It's really
I didn't know
cool.
you could just say, fuck you. We don't know any of these people, but you don't need to. I'm going to shoot one of them and you still care about these people for some reason.
That opening scene with the helicopter and the dog is really cool, having watched the 2011 film as well, because the character that gets shot at the start of the film is present all throughout the 2011 film. Like, he's there the entire time. And like I said, like, there's a dog that runs away at the end, and you don't have subtitles for what he says at the start of the film. But my understanding is that like again, having seen the other part, what he says, they go, hey, like, you know, why are you shooting the dog? And he's like, it's not a dog. It's just something. Like, it's like, you know, like, that's what he says. And he says that when they get in the chopper and they chase the dog down. And that whole sequence is insane. And as you said, it's so unsettling because you don't expect the film's going to open like that. And it's shocking and it's uncomfortable and it's weird.
It sets you up with the expectation this is not going to go the way you think, to quote The Last Jedi. Like, it's very much had to get to it before you did. But which I must say, you are off your game a little bit by not referencing The Last Jedi in the past couple. And so
we literally did a Rian Johnson film last week. What are you talking about?
Yeah, but you didn't like make a joke, and okay, so sweetie, you know,
listen back, honey. Listen back.
But nonetheless, but as we go forward, the thing about it is, as you just said, Neff, like, they start you off in this completely new space. And Chase, I want to know your thoughts. They start you off here. What was your relationship to that? What are some things that you notice, obviously, upon multiple rewatches? What's something like, just how, like, this opening was probably one of my favorite things because it just proved you don't need to do so much shit that people typically do to get a movie really going.
Yeah. One of the things that I personally didn't notice until I watched someone else talking about the film, and it's one of those things, like, you watch it over and over again, you start to notice things. The opening of the film, like you said, like, you're so used to, like, oh, what are they doing? What's the dog doing? Oh, they're shooting at the dog. Oh, who are these people? Oh, we're going to learn about these people. It's like, no. And what's so interesting about the opening sequence that you get, and kind of its parallel to Alien, when they're having breakfast on the Nostromo, is you start to realize, like, oh, okay, who is everyone and what's their role? Where you kind of have that same vibe, but the thing about The Thing is John Carpenter very deliberately only uses last names, and he only uses very, very vague understandings of who is what. McCready is a pilot. Blair is a doctor, and everyone, and Knowles is a chef. And it's one of those things, like, these are not super memorable names intentionally. Like, you have these things where they're not quite names, like Knowles, Childs, Windows. And it's just one of those things. This is all done to set up that you don't want to become attached to a certain character. You don't want to be attached to Joe Smith because you're going to root for Joe Smith. Joe Smith can't be the guy. No, it's Windows. No, it's Clark. No, it's Knowles. No, it's Childs.
Brilliant.
They don't want you to become attached to any of these characters. They don't want you to have a relationship with these characters. The closest you get is Mac. And then later in the movie, they throw it off for you, where it's like, you see Mac's clothes and you're like, Mac is the Thing. And then you're like, oh, maybe Mac isn't the Thing. And I think it's just the intentionality. And it's something I love because, like, maybe to derail it, like, I replayed Silent Hill 2, the PS2 version, to get ready for the remake. And the one thing I do love when films do is just, like, unapologetic intentionality, where it's just like, I am not giving you these people's names. I'm not giving you their backstories. The only backstory you get is, I can't even, and this is the best part, I can't even remember the character's name. The guy with the red hair and the beard, and the captain, the guy whose name is basically Cap. He's like, I've known him for 10 years. That can't be it. That is the closest you get to a relationship and a backstory of anyone. Everyone
which again
else
is very alien
yeah,
too.
yeah.
Very alien, where it's and also what kind of works well, even with Kurt Russell. Like the only thing is, and then obviously '80s Kurt Russell was huge, but like even then they don't really in the beginning even give you like, oh, Kurt Russell is the guy you're gonna root for. You know,
He's
like
kind
he
of a
starts
dick.
off, you see him again destroy the computer. Like it's like he's funny, but like other than that, you really don't have any defining characteristics to this guy. He's just, and it's such a masterful thing because he's just as plain. It's again what I love about the first Alien is Sigourney Weaver is just part of the crew. Like there is no, she doesn't stand out amongst everybody else. She just happens to be the final person.
Matt is a helicopter pilot, which is cool, but it's like he's not Luke Skywalker. He's not going to fly
He's not
his
Han Solo.
helicopter.
He's not like,
he's not,
you know,
shooting the thing and he's going to do like a backflip in the helicopter. No, like that's just his job. That's just what he does. And then they take it away from him.
That it is his job, you know?
Yeah.
Nav, what do you think?
There's
like,
this really cool thing that you mentioned around like intentionality with this film too, right? Where I was reading that this was delayed many times for studio reasons or whatever else. Like it was plagued by like kind of production issues too, and along that time, they made refinements to the script again and again and again. And so by the time you get to what we get to experience, this has been cleaned up a lot, and everything that happens on screen is intentional. And one of the scenes I want to talk about, which it probably comes under like the direction a little bit for conversation a bit later, but that scene where they're doing the analysis of the blood, there's a tell. There's a tell. And in the director's commentary, which I didn't watch the director's commentary, but I read in the director's commentary, the tell is that all of the humans have an eye light.
Yep.
Like a reflection in the eye. And the one who doesn't is the alien. And there's also the thing, sorry. And there's also what's the word, like people who think that by the end of the film, Childs, I think it is at the end of the film, he doesn't have the eye glisten. So they're like, is he's at the end? And the directors have only said that tell existed in that one scene, so it doesn't really apply to the end. But then they're like, you know, we get to speculate. And I'm sure we'll talk about like the ending and our kind of interpretations of it as well. But we've covered some of it in this section anyway, but I know that there's sort of this uncanny realism to this film. Like it does feel very real, but in the sense that it's like I've talked to you about in the past, Kay, where I'm like, I feel like you have this barometer of things that are like unrealistic, and then they get to this kind of very real sense, and they just blow past real to the point where, like, to the untrained eye, it's absurd and not realistic at all. But somehow it's like you kind of come back around to going, how is it more real when it's not realistic than it was when it was? And it's one of my favorite things.
It's crazy. I agree, because it's one of my favorite things. I've been thinking about this a lot recently, which is the like shit can happen in real life where you're like, oh, like it's just a random happenstance in the world, right? Like, I don't know, I forgot my car keys. You end up going back to get your car keys. All of a sudden somebody's in your house. Like weird shit like that or something like that, like can happen. And if I heard my friend tell that story, I'd be like, oh my God, is everybody okay? Are you okay? Like, did that happen? If I saw that in the film, I'd be like, bullshit. Like, oh, of course he forgets his keys. Like, you know, it's like, there's weird shit that we accept in movies that we are like, or stuff that we accept in real life, but there's sometimes not a crossover. And then there's stuff in movies that will just be like, yep, I accept this. Like, this is real. This is what would happen. And then you hear about it in real life and you're like, I don't know. But and it's weird to see what stuff, like, I could not tell you for the life of me what those things are. Like, there's not a list. There's nothing. It's just like, it really depends on, can you make me believe it? And Chase, I want to know from your point of view, and I guess both of you guys, what was stuff with this film that kind of helped make that uncanny realism?
It's so funny because I went back to New York to visit some friends and stuff. And while I was staying with my friend Daniel, we wanted to watch something after we were eating, and we watched the 3-Body Problem, the first episode. And the show like seems very interesting, but the one thing we said was like, it's so funny that this group of elite physicists also happens to be the most attractive set of people in the bar when they go out for dinner, for drinks. And it's like, I've met a couple physicists in my life, and not to say that physicists can't be attractive, but typically,
but they haven't been to you.
It's like one of those things like, and this is what I think is so cool about a lot of these films from this time is the costumes were bought at your local outdoor shop. They're wearing puffy, Antarctic equipped clothing. MacReady puts on proper, Arctic glasses because like at certain points of that, you're worried about your eyes getting sunburned, which is why he wears those glasses. And a lot of the cast are balding middle-aged men. Like they're not Hollywood studs. They're not like, you're not gonna, be like, oh wow, this guy's so attractive. Nothing bad could happen to him. Like you have Kurt Russell, who's just a beautiful, marvel of a man.
And they throw him in there anyway.
Yeah, but he's also scruffy. He's got the long hair. Most of his face is obscured throughout a lot of this movie. They put him in the hoodie a lot of times where you can't really see much of his face. And then Keith David, also a very attractive man, but also again most of the time he's in a parka where most of his face is obscured. And I think the realism and just how everyone looks, how everyone is dressed, no one is worried about what their hair looks like. Like hair is jotting out from everyone because someone just woke up. They're not brushing their hair. They're not wearing makeup. They're just people. And the way they interact with each other, I think, is also very interesting because you can tell that no one necessarily really likes or dislikes anyone. Like you have that one moment where Knowles is playing Very Superstitious, which is a great song to have in the film. And he
one of like the only needle drops.
Yeah. And it's funny you brought up the score because the score literally is 2 notes. It's dun, 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 dun. That's the score of the film. But, like Knowles is blasting music and some dude's like, dude, turn it down. I'm trying to sleep. And Knowles is roller skating around and he fakes out turning the volume down.
Yeah.
And that's about it. And this is something that like your annoying coworker would do. You don't hate your coworker. You don't love your coworker. This is just like the annoyances of living with people. And you can obviously understand you're stuck in Antarctica for 7 months at a time. You're going to get on each other's nerves pretty quickly. But again, there's not this like, oh, these two characters absolutely hate each other or these two characters are absolutely, it's just, this is a very like, everyone's definitely on each other's nerves. And it's understandable that they are because they're in Antarctica, but you don't have drama driving anything. It's just people in this situation that didn't ask to be here. Well, didn't ask to be in the situation they're in. They asked to be in Antarctica, but like this film doesn't need to have extra
flair
silliness going on. Yeah, like there's no flair. It's just like this is a group of researchers and the people that are also employed by the company that's doing this that just got put in this position.
Yeah,
like,
it's interesting. Like I feel like when there are films like this where people are kind of in a claustrophobic space, you kind of get the sense that there's this like, what's the word? Like a sick delight in I get to kill this person. Like it's kind of. It's the movie Wanted, where he's like leaving and he smashes Peter Quill with the keyboard. He's like, I've always hated that guy. It's those kind of things that you kind of expect, but they don't take any pleasure in this. It's actually the most uncomfortable. Like everyone is on edge. Like you said, it's like the toxic workplace up to the max. It's mental. And as you said, like,
Nav, can I ask you? Can I? Oh, go. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump on you. Like, finish your point, and then I have a question for you. Well, like to your end, like one thing I noticed, and I want to know if you agree or have your own thoughts on it. I feel like this movie, and it's not something that often people say about John Carpenter or like his work. He really trusted the actors to bring enough of their own characteristics to these characters without having to, as Chase said, be like, I've known this guy for 20 years. We were best friends in Nam, and he watched my back as I saw my mother get shot. Like, I don't know, like his sort of like, they don't do anything like that. You just, as Chase was saying, you see the guy roller skating, you see them, like it's all visual.
Yeah.
But like, I want to know from you, was there any performances that stood out, or was there any like little details that really made you feel like that kind of makes me buy into this world more? Like stuff that very show don't tell, like kind of stuff, which is obviously, I know something that you love so much. And I was just curious to know if there was anything that resonated.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple of parts, because one is every person is a suspect. And it's like, if you compare this to, like we said, like the title of the episode, it's a whodunit, right? And John Carpenter to like come together and make this film, there was what's the word? There was a journey for him, right? He saw the original. He's like, this is a classic. I don't want to remake a classic. And they said to him, read the book. Read the book and adapt the book. Don't adapt the movie. And he read the book and he was like, this is like Agatha Christie, like whodunit. I want to make that. I want to do it. And it's funny, you think about like a modern one of those, not necessarily like the Knives Out one as much, but more I'm thinking like Murder on the Orient Express.
Yeah.
There is this sense of like they're trying to say everyone's a suspect, but like everyone is playing it kind of like they're not. And at the end, there's the, you know, the big reveal of like everyone was actually involved, and it doesn't feel like it has a lot of weight. You know, it feels like, oh, like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
But there's, in this film, he gets that element of it so right, you know, that you're engrossed and you need to know, you know, who done it or who's the alien, and everyone's acting uncomfortable, you know, and the sequel or the prequel does that very well as well. You know, they recognize this thing of like the thing can't replicate non-organic material. So if you had feelings and it replicated you, you lose your feelings. So that's how we're going to find out you lost a piercing or something like that. And those are little tells throughout the movie of like who's kind of what. And I find that really interesting too. But I was reading as well that there was a lot of backstory for MacReady at a certain point. There was like a post-World War veteran who was like dishonorably discharged for causing the death of like a best mate and had PTSD, and it was all of this stuff.
Wow.
And I believe it was Kurt Russell who was like, we're not doing that.
Huh.
This is the character. Like the backstory is the backstory. Maybe that is part of him, but he's like, I'm just doing this. We're not going to do that. And I think it's really interesting, as Chase was saying too, how these characters come with such a lack of backstory. It's an empty slate, and you kind of get to project your own relationships onto them based on their performances. And again, even like I thought for a while that MacReady was one of them, you know. I absolutely was in that camp. I was like, oh yeah. And then he showed up and he's got the gun and he's like, don't know, I know what I am, nobody do it. And I was like, bro, you're sus, you're so sus. So yeah, it's like, it's this kind of I was experiencing it with The Penguin last week. I'm watching some of those episodes, and Sophia Falcone by Kristen Milioti plays this kind of there's a lot going on in here, and you see it in her eyes. And I think every actor here is doing that. So you can see that every single actor's mind is racing with every single moment. Like they're so invested in that, and they portray and express that so well. When they have conversations and they're like, hold on, wait, but me, and you can see the steam coming out of the ears because the cogs are turning the entire time. So I think like across the board, everyone is on that level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and so to go into that, like with the unknown, and well, I guess also talking about the props real quick. Let's see, you mentioned obviously like Rob's work in this, and I kind of think it's like because we're going to talk more about the mystery, which will lead into, you know, the direction and shit like that. But I really think that we need to kind of give to your point, Chase, about the realism, right? Like it feels real. I think the props have a similar mentality, right? Like the alien itself, the thing itself is from a design standpoint brilliant. Like we were talking about it off mic, and I really want to hear, Chase, your thoughts on this, but we were discussing about the design. And I heard a video when I was watching this, just hearing people talking about it as well as the making of it. And I am of the belief that in general, people's imagination is 10 times more scary than anything you can show them. And most horror movies treat it as such. A lot of horror books have had that same luck. And in a couple of cases, you can see the actual thing, and it's terrifying. This is one of those movies that, as you brilliantly said, does both. Of it is horrifying to see what you see, and horrifying to not see like things about it. And in the best of ways, this movie just has some of the craziest moments of design I've ever seen, of being like, I would not even know, how did somebody come up with this is how this looks? Because like I just don't even see it. It kind of reminded me in the Tarkovsky Clone Wars. It kind of reminded me of Dirge a bit, with this idea of like, but Dirge obviously is a humanoid, at least by the armor, but it kind of with all the tentacles and shit like that. I was like, oh, I could see this being, it could form into anything. But Chase, tell me your thoughts on the design of the thing, like the way it was made, like all that stuff. I really want to know your thoughts on that whole idea.
Yeah, the thing that I like about the thing is you see it, but you don't.
Yes.
Like if someone were to say, what does the alien look like? You don't have an answer. Yeah. You see it constantly. You see all of its forms, but I think that is what it does so well. And it's what I think a lot of horror films fall flat on, is that big reveal of the monster, right? And I think very few films get it right. I think The Ring, I just rewatched The Ring recently. That's the one where like the reveal is scarier than what you thought when Samara comes through the television. Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. Like that's a great reveal. But with something like The Thing, is we see it pretty quickly with the dog in the cage. Like that's 20 minutes into the film. And it's rough to watch. It's just the dog is peeling itself back, and it's just this horrible like monster with these tendrils that come and wrap around you. We see it when the defibrillator is going off, and then it pulls out. You see it again with the blood test. You see it at the end. Like you see so many different forms of the thing, and each one is more unique than the next. Yeah. But you still don't know what it is. At the end of the movie, it is still the thing. It's not a xenomorph. It's not a predator. It's not, this classification of monster alien. It is the thing. And I think that's what's so interesting about how they did it, is because there's no consistency to it. Mm-hmm. What you see with the dog is not what you see with the defibrillator, and what you see with the defibrillator is not what you see with the blood. Yeah. It changes constantly. Like when you have the mouth that grabs windows. It's just like, you haven't seen that yet. Like that's not it. It's not a Michael Myers that's coming after you.
They're throwing like everything at this, and by the end of the film, you even have even more things you haven't seen before. Like, well, what shocked me a lot was the hand going through the skin on the face.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that was so impressive as a practical effect, and at the same time, I was just like, this actually has become kind of like Alien. He's being chased by the thing, where up until now it's just been these things show up. One special effect in this film that did take me out a little bit, I'm wondering if you guys picked up on this one too. Literally one in the entire film, and it's during the blood test scene where McCready is looking at one of the guys and he's holding the wire, and he's like, we're going to find out for certain. And I'm looking and I'm like, that's a fake hand. you could like there's a little hand in the corner, and I think it's meant to be like McCready's holding it in his hand, and I was like, that is a fake hand, and then he puts the wire in it, and the stuff comes out, and so I was like, I knew it.
Did you know that scene beforehand? Had you ever seen that scene? Okay, because here's where I honestly disagree with you. Like, obviously you're correct. Like, I had seen the scene before, and even I was still caught up in the drama of the moment that I wasn't looking at the hand at all. And I'm watching Kurt Russell, because this is a scene I was going to bring up when we get to direction, because John Carpenter, typically it's the rule of three, right? And I think this still follows the rule of three, but it's brilliant because you have like 5 people that he's got to test. And he tests like himself. He tests the 2 dead bodies. Then he tests like another guy, or he's like about to test the other guy.
Test either. It's like light up the wire again, and we gotta wait. And we gotta heat it up.
And then it's like, oh, so guess you killed an innocent man. And it's like setting all this tension. And then they start talking about fucking Gary. And Gary's like, I'm going to do you last. Like, he's like, I'm going to do you last. And I think that's why, like, the script, but like, he's like, the script starts getting you into that, lulls you into a false sense of security, right? Where you're like, I feel unnerved. I feel out of my element here. And I am watching it and I'm like, there's no way. I don't know. I feel so. And then when that moment happened, it happens in a wide.
Yeah.
It's like it happens in this shot that they've been cutting back to for this path. So for me, I completely disagree. Like, I get it. And I have heard people saying, if you notice, his hand does look a little bit more fake here. And so you're not alone in that observation. Just for me, I was so caught up in it that it was a jump scare moment and I knew it was coming.
Well, like, it's interesting because it's like, I feel like it still is like a jump scare because I didn't know what was coming out. All I knew was something's going to happen. And so in that moment, I was a bit like, that's a fake hand. Something's about to happen. Okay, he's probably the one. But from there, the blood coming alive and then what happens next, I was like, oh my God. So it's funny. It was something that as I was thinking about it, I was like, there's one moment that stands out to me of me going, oh, I see the piece there. But not enough to take away from like my enjoyment overall. But I know you, Chase, have seen the film obviously like a few times now. Like, are there things like that at all that stand out to you?
Or even like favorite effects.
It's one of those things. Like, I think even though like it's one of those things you can definitely, it's got the Luke Skywalker or the Obi-Wan Kenobi lightsaber turn on in A New Hope, where it's like you clearly cut here. The defibrillator going in, there's clearly a cut. There's clearly like the guy's chest, and then they cut to the prop that's going to open up. But even then, like seeing it just opens completely. His hands fall in, and it clamps down, and it's something that, yes, movies have done it, but I haven't really seen it since Evil Dead 2013, where they very clearly try to get it as visceral as possible, where when it clamps down on his hands and he pulls away and his hands come off, and you see the bones and the cartilage just pulling away. And it's just like, I love stuff like that. Like the attention to detail on how gross you can make something. And the thing is never not gross. It is all gross all the time, basically, whenever you see it.
It's wet horror.
But that was just one of those things. It is wet horror. Yeah. And I think that one is great. Even though it's kind of the face is goofy, and then the head pulling itself off, and it rips off of his own body just through the thing, just pushing it off. And then you get the spider head, which is it's kind of goofy, but I love it.
It's mental too, though, because I still look at that and I go, hold on, that looks like stop motion, but like, how did you blend that so perfectly with what's on screen here? And as it's running away, I'm like, it looks real. Do you know what I mean? Like, to a certain point, it looks as real as it could possibly look. It couldn't be better.
Yeah, there's another moment in the movie, and this is just one of those things where, like, when you look at movies of this era, when you look at Alien and Star Wars and some of the Star Trek movies, and you look at the special effects of the era, the UFO scene, that's a painting, and they walk on top of the painting, and it's like you're watching like. I know in my mind how they did that, but I'm still like, that's so impressive that they pulled that off with the depth and the scale that they did.
Yeah.
And it's just like, there's just so many moments of this that I think in like the late 70s and early 80s, like the practical effects and what they were able to achieve and make believable. I think like Star Wars and ILM is obviously a huge one, just how they use paintings and miniatures and stuff like that made it all believable. But stuff like this comes off really well. When you look at Alien, like the miniatures in Alien, obviously that was very inspired by Star Wars, but just the thing taking special effects in such a wildly different direction. Like, yes, you look at it and you're like, okay, this is clearly a puppet, and it's just covered in some type of oil to make it glisten in the stage lights. But like, you're never like, oh, this is a puppet, I'm not grossed out or scared by it. You're like, this is still a dog pulling its own skin off.
Yeah, it's still so very unsettling.
Yeah.
You're watching this macabre painting come to life, and in a way that is just so creative.
And there's something with the opening that we didn't discuss, and I think it's one of the things that kind of, what's the word, that brought the kind of shock of what I was watching to me, like that this is a serious movie, you know, and it's the opening shot actually feels so cheesy. The flying saucer coming through space. I'm like, I was like, oh, okay, that's what we're doing here. And it's like, no, that's not what we're doing here at all. Like, so that kind of juxtaposition is really cool from the opening. And one of the things that did stand out to me was the use of matte paintings. And you don't see it at all anymore because it's just, you know, there's no need for it.
You don't need
digital art, but there is actually something so beautiful about it. And as you said, like Star Wars does it so well of extending the stage with it, and it's
almost to the point of a seamless effect.
Yeah, and it's to my understanding, like a lost craft essentially. Like you don't do it anymore.
It's having a little bit of a resurgence with stuff like Dune. Apparently, it used a lot of matte paintings to some degree.
I know Dune did something really interesting with its like green screens and how they used that. They had like sand screens, so they wouldn't have like,
they were all brown.
Like that's cool for extending the scenes out. But I didn't know about the matte paintings.
I could be wrong about this. Dark Side Divas, friends of the show, are doing for their Patreon. They're doing Arrakis Divas, and they're going play by play. And that was something that Chris talked about, which I hadn't heard. But instead of like digital extensions or even the volume, they potentially, again, I need to do research on my end. But from what he said, it was that they use stuff like literally like painting a canvas.
That's cool.
And then they would reuse the canvas, just change the paint. But on top of that, like, I guess going into some of the mystery, because this is where, and I think I'm like kind of touching on John Carpenter's directing here as well. And, you know, Neff, I know you want to talk about that too. This is a thriller, like as to our name, this is a whodunit, which I think is what's so brilliant about this movie. And Neff, I think actually, well, Chase, you talked about it before. It's like this movie, not much sense. It's very Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It's very much that idea, but it takes it to this element that very few places are able to fully. Like very few people are kind of able to really nail this. And I know because I want to make something similar to this. And it's hard not to look at this movie and how do you do it better? Like, you know, like it's such a tall order.
Yeah. It's a point that, like, I know you wanted to talk to as well, Chase. So like, I would love to hear your thoughts on it, but it is like, it's the fear of the unknown. We talked about the monster, not seeing the monster, not knowing it, but this, like, it lives in that space.
Yep. The thing about the unknown, and again, I think this goes from a beginning to the end, is there's so many aspects of this film. Like when they go to the Norwegian base and they see the ice block, and we never see what was in the block. Like they don't show us that. And when we first see the remains of what happened to one of the Norwegians, what's really cool is like that shot is out of focus. You know that there is a mangled face, but it's out of focus. So they're not letting you see it right away. And then they show it to you in the next scene. And it is one of those things that, like, kind of like what we talked about, is like we don't know what the thing actually looks like. Even at the end of the movie, we don't know, is this like a single-celled organism that mutates? Does it have an actual form? Like we don't know. And also I think what they do with it's not just who done it, right? Because anyone could have done it, and it's not just one person. And the other thing that's really interesting about the movie that is the unknown is the order. Who got it when? Because the first thing we see is we know the dog has it, right? We know that the Norwegians were going after the dog for a reason. And then we see the dog walk into a room with a silhouette. And because these are all middle-aged men, it could have been any one of them. And we think, it was Clark, because and Blair says, you need to watch Clark. And he's like the ultimate MacGuffin, because Max shoots him and he's not it. And it's just one of those things that you don't know who it is. You don't know when it is. And they do not tell you. And there's even the part at the very end of the movie of Knowles is he walks off screen and we never see him again. Like at the very end. And it's just like, we didn't see him die. We didn't see him get assimilated. And the next thing we see is Mac is leaving, and he gets into that little remnant of a hut, and then Childs comes out to see him. And they're just both looking at him, and they're like, we're probably going to die. We're going to freeze to death, and we don't know where Knowles is. And I think what it does in so many good ways, and just like, they don't want you to know what is going on at any time in this film. And there's that part when they go to check on Blair, and you see in frame there's a noose, and it's like, he's clearly planning to kill himself. So he can't be the thing, but clearly he becomes the thing at some point. You just don't know when it happened.
Yeah.
And I think that's they did it so well, because the thing that I hear so often on social media, even from our friends, is show me, don't tell me, show me, don't tell me. And my biggest issue with that complaint is, in the modern era, is I can count, if I had a nickel for every time someone said, show me, don't tell me, and they actually showed you and you just weren't paying attention, I'd be rich as hell.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And the thing is the ultimate, we are only showing you. And the thing that's so good about the thing is they show you, but at the same time, they don't show you anything.
Yeah.
Like, and I think it's just so masterfully done, of just like, they don't tell you what it is. They don't tell you what planet it's from. They think it's from 100,000 years ago, but this is all researchers just making educated guesses. Like the blood test is like Max saying, I think this will work. And then the rest of the crew is just like, why? This doesn't make any sense. You're testing blood with a hot wire, and it's not doing anything until it does.
Yeah.
But it's just like, there's nothing to tell you anything concrete about this movie, and things just happen in the own film's accordance. Yeah. It's just like the film is only playing by its own rules.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting seeing how they play on that too. It's a lot of like really good plant and payoff here. Like you were talking about the end of the film, and like, you know, not knowing where Knowles is. And it's like earlier in the film, you got the doctor sitting there with the computer and it's doing the math, and it's going, this will take, what is it? I think it's 216,000 hours or something like that.
Yeah.
And I did the math on it, and it was like, it will take 4 years for it
until
to
it's completely taken over.
And it's just like, that's it. that's done. That's for all intents and purposes, it's kind of the end of the world. Like that's where we leave. That's where we leave this film, which is so like tragic and uncomfortable to sit with. And again, you also have those questions of like,
if it's gone.
That look at the end. You've got this child's one of them. You know, like
did it survive?
Yeah, like it's.
You don't get the moment of like, did we kill, we think we killed Jason and Jason just came back at the last minute. This is we don't know if the thing died. Like,
it's kind of I know, Neff, you haven't seen it, but it's kind of a The Birds ending where you're like, there's no catharsis. There's no, like, you have what should be the classic horror movie catharsis, which is a kind of killer one-liner that blow up the thing. And it's like, oh, you big explosion. It's the Jaws smile, you son of a bitch, you know, vibe. And it should be it. But it's not.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's something
that the 2011 film does really well too, which is a little easier because they can lean on a lot more like CGI, which is like there's a character that they're helping and the character kind of starts falling to pieces and all the pieces kind of come alive and individually have like these little kind of like caterpillar versions of the thing that are so creepy. And it's just like, it kind of does give that impression that it's never ending. It doesn't die. It just continues to evolve.
Well, and that's, I think that's also to the point of the creature design earlier. My feeling is that, and I think we may have lost Chase for just a second, so I don't know if he'll be back or not.
They're probably just fixing the camera.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But nonetheless, going with it.
I know there was something you wanted to add,
so
go for it.
Yeah, so a couple things, but like that was something I was thinking about back to the design of it. Every part of the thing feels like it's trying to survive and evolve with whatever state it's in. Like the head comes off. I don't think the intention for the thing was to have the head come off, but it's like, well, the head fell off. I don't have the legs. I don't have this. Guess I'm gonna have to form legs. Guess I'm gonna have to form eyes because I can't see out of this goddamn thing. And it's like every part of it is, and as kind of McCready says, and it going to the blood thing, he's like, my best guess is every part of this thing is trying to survive.
Yeah.
Which makes sense when you start to hear it that way. You know, like you're like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The blood probably would be trying to do its own thing. And to your point, like earlier we were talking about, like the fear isn't wrapped around the thing. The thing is certainly transparent, but you're afraid of the people. Yeah. One of my favorite scenes is that doctor, as you were talking about. It's kind of a better, in my opinion, a better version of there we are, but a better version of Rook in Alien. Like Rook in the original Alien does a great job and fills a very surprising part of that movie, which is realizing, oh, he's an android. And he knew what this whole thing was about. What I love about the scientist, I'm blanking on the character name. There are two people I wanted to, yeah. Well, is it Doc? Is it just simply Doc? All right. But anyway, the doctor, after he finds out what you were saying, like he finds out that this is going to kill everybody. He most likely is the one that sabotaged the helicopter. And then he's destroying all the radios. And I love this from a writing standpoint, because you look at this character and you're like, I get it. You set up a character that you're like, I understand this person believes he's being self-sacrificial, where he's like, we can't allow this thing to get out of here. We have to quarantine, even if that means us dying. We can't allow this thing to take us.
Yeah.
And I thought that was I think it's a great way to set up the human factor in this movie of John Carpenter basically saying, it's not the alien that's the problem. It's anybody. One of these guys can go stir crazy and shoot you. It doesn't matter. Like it doesn't matter.
By accident, you know, like, and you have the moments of like the scalpel and like you said, McCready shooting the
and
guy.
he shoots him.
It's like, you killed an innocent man. But man, that stuff is awful.
Oh yeah, well, and then you have the subversion of tropes of, like, as you were saying, Chase, and you can kind of see where maybe this was a production thing. Maybe they weren't able to get the actor back, or maybe some of that, like as you were saying, the production was stopped for multiple times. But it's one of those things that I think that helped the movie.
Yeah.
In a weird way. It's kind of like we talk about Jordan Peele said that when you're writing and you come up against a limitation, whether it's production or not, Jordan Peele always tries to ask, why is it better that we have this instead, or we didn't get an auditorium, but we got a classroom? Why is it better that it's this and not this? And I think this movie asks that question constantly. Like, one of my favorite examples, like Chase, you were talking about, like, people that just disappear off screen. It's the guy that finds McCready's jacket. I'm blanking on the character name, but all of a sudden we find it. It's like, we just see his glasses and a burnt corpse. It's like, did somebody kill him? Did he kill himself? What happened? Like, that's what I love about this movie. Chase, your audio, you might need to reset real quick, because I just didn't quite hear you chime in there. But the last person I want to call out is Clark, played by Richard Mosser, I believe is his name. He did so. Oh yeah, we can hear you. Perfect.
Great.
But he did such a great job as Clark, because Clark has that great scene where he looks at the dogs. And again, you don't need to know a ton about this character, but it's kind of like the Rancor Keeper in, like, Return of the Jedi. It's like, I get it. You didn't show me a lot, but I get it. I just watched this guy, how he cares about this dog. You can see this guy, as soon as those dogs are killed, it's like he's got nothing. And he's the guy that gets the scalpel. He's like, somebody killed my dogs. I'm mad. I'm scared. But he also seems kind of reasonable. And at first I was like, oh, he's been alone with the dogs. He's had that.
He is every step along the way. You are led to believe that he's the thing, and he's the one person that isn't. And, like, I think Clark is an interesting character. Fuchs is the guy with the glasses. That is mysteriously burned. Like, he's also another interesting character because Clark is a very emotional character. That, like, you're right. When there is a monster ravaging dogs and you don't know what it's going to do to the rest of you. And I believe it's Mac that shoots the shotgun at the dog.
Yeah.
And Clark pulls the gun away from him, and he's like, no, don't shoot the dog. Yeah. It's like, even though there's something crazy going on, he cares so much about these dogs, and he's the one that wants the dog to roam around freely, even though he very much shouldn't. Yeah. He is a very emotional character, and he's also portrayed as, like, a very stereotypical masculine man, a very blue collar. And again, his name is Clark. He takes care of the dogs. That's all you know about his character. You don't know, he lost his dog when he was 6 years old. And it's like, we don't need to know that. And it's just, you see that. And then you see Fuchs, who throughout the entire time that he is on screen, he is level-headed. He's logical about everything. And he's like, hey, Mac, we need to go talk. We need to talk outside, because I don't want whatever the thing is to hear what we're saying and get an advantage on us. And he's kind of got this, sense of how to get out of this in the best way. And we lose him, and we don't know how. We just see a burned body and glasses, and we never see him again. And it's just one of those things. It's like, there's so many elements of this movie that are just so perfectly done. And again, I think can it be replicated? I don't want to say it can't be replicated, but I don't think anyone has come close to doing what this movie did.
That's the key. It's like, not that anybody can't, it's that nobody has. And that's to transition us into our next point. Naf, I'm curious to know your thoughts on this too, because the direction. One thing I texted Naf was, I think outside of horror circles, I think John Carpenter is. And before I saw this movie, I probably would have been tempted to say the same thing, which is, he just can't be horror movies, like good movies, but can't be horror movies.
It's like,
you watch this movie, and if anybody else did this movie, it would have been talked about, like at the Oscars. Like, it would have been, if it was, again, as you said, if it came out fucking today, it still would have been considered great.
Yep.
And I'm curious, Naf, like, your thought on all of that.
Yeah, it's interesting that I constantly find with any of the like classics that I go back and watch, I have this preconceived notion of what an 80s film is going to be like. You know, like down to like Die Hard last year at Christmas and going, hold on, it's kind of that, but it's not really. And same deal to this. You know, you see a lot of stuff about the practical effects and stuff, and you go, it's going to be this kind of like goofy thing, but I can understand why it was scary back in the day, but it's like, no, this is like,
Yeah.
like to quote you, Chase, like it's very cerebral, like having to think about what's going on here, and it's not at all what I expect. And it's why like one of the points I wanted to talk to was literally just like my reaction to going, this is a serious movie. Like that was shocking to me. You know, like I thought that it was gonna be like a silly fun thing, and I'd be like, oh cool, that's kind of like, you know, like I watched The Substance earlier this year, like obviously like a few weeks ago, and I'm like, that's silly, that's fun. There's like some elements of it that go a little serious, but it's like, I think it's designed to be entertainment, not necessarily designed to be like scary, if that makes sense. Like I watched it and I was grossed out, but I wasn't like scared, and like the uncomfortable that I got from The Substance was from like the visual, not from like the
body
what's
horror
happening with the characters. Yeah, like yeah, and so there's something so much more scary about, like we said, just looking around and going, you can't trust anyone. No one is safe. I'm uncomfortable. And I think one of the things you brought up earlier, Chase, the 3-body problem, I think does that quite well too. That some parts where you go, hold on, this person's like in it, and then oh, now these characters are making these decisions for the fate of the human race, but like, oh my god, that just kind of happened, and these people were involved in that. It leaves you uncomfortable. It's like, what are we willing to do to survive? You know, like at that point, it's the same as I think probably what The Thing experiences. It will survive at any cost, and that's horrifying.
Yeah, and just to like touch on that, like it's skilled crafts people in general,
Everyone's
especially
on
with
their
regards to
A game,
filmmaking. It's very few people, as you said, like the fact that we're sitting here at 2024 and honestly, earnestly saying, not hyperbole, we are very well-rounded film watchers. We are. I think we're all pretty much of a point where it's like, you know, we can still say things are good, but we're like, okay, we've seen this before, but not like, again, there are redeeming parts to things like that. The fact that we earnestly are sitting here and saying, I don't think I still have seen anything like The Thing.
Yeah.
It tells you the testament to this film. And it makes me wonder what, if this was released even 2 years later, like what this could have done.
Yeah.
Like, I'm glad that it's inspiring. Like, again, I think that a lot of the people now, a lot of the A24 horror crowd is very much inspired by stuff like The Thing and very cerebral horror in general, and understanding that horror is more than slasher, it's more than genre. It's like, and again, I think in the next couple of years, you're going to see a bigger push. We talked about this in Silence of the Lambs. Like, I think in the next 5-10 years, you're going to see a huge
because it's
emergence.
Cycles, yeah? Like,
yeah, it's cycles. And like a lot of our generation has grown up knowing horror movies can be absolute critical darlings and can be just as valid as, I don't know, the Maestro, you know, like it's just, you know, that's what I'm saying. Like, and,
but I know,
but you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I know, Chase, like the ending in particular was something that, like you had a lot of thoughts on. We've covered like some of that, but are there other things related to the ending that you wanted to talk about before we kind of transition to Cinema La Carte?
Yeah, I mean, the ending of The Thing is it's something that I had to like come to terms with. Of like, I used to hate endings like The Thing, but it's something I've really grown to appreciate. Like, there's books and there's shows and there's movies where the unsatisfying ending has its own merits and has its own value. And I think in a movie like The Thing, where you are not supposed to have a good time with this, like there's no hero here. Like, Mac kills a dude basically. Like, I mean, it's in self-defense because he's coming at him with, you know, a sharp object, but like he kills a dude, like just straight up shoots a dude in the head.
And it's not like glorified or anything at all. It's actually like an uncomfortable, like, the shock of when it happens.
It's very fast. It's
and
not like
no blood splatter everywhere, face falling apart. Like, it's a boom, gone.
Pop, and Clark is gone. And you see that again with the Norwegian when Cap, breaks the glass with the gun and boom. And I'm like, also, hell of a shot, Cap. Good job.
Oh, yeah.
But it's one of those things is that there's no winner. The thing is the winner here.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things that, like, when you have a film that the theme is you can't trust anything, you can't trust anyone, nothing is what it seems. There's no happy ending here. And you learn very early on that, like, when Max says when they're getting ready to blow up and burn the station, Max, I forget the line, but he basically says, like, we're not making it out of here and we're making sure it doesn't. No one questions him. And they've all consciously made that decision. And it's like, yeah, they're going down with the ship. And I think the fact that you don't get a happy ending, and I think if you end it with Mac, watching the burning station, you already have this, like, he's not making it out of here. This is the unhappy ending. This is not your Ripley, here's my, space log of all the things that happen.
Yeah.
Just that, like, you do have that when Max, he records the tape in the middle of the movie. But it's just like, you could have ended the film there and it would have still been like a dreary kind of ending. But then Childs comes into frame.
Yeah.
And it's just like, is he the thing? And I've seen a ton of people talk about it, of at what point, like, people think, like, did Mac become the thing at some point off screen? There's enough, like, people like taking it, bit by bit, and it's like Mac may have become the thing at one point. And it's just, you're sitting there, you're watching two men who haven't really been getting along the entire movie. There's bits and pieces where they cooperate, but Mac tied up Childs, and he had him tied up when the thing exposed itself, and they're not super on great terms. It's not the Jaws moment where Richard Dreyfuss pops out of the water and, like, it's like, oh wow, we blew up the shark and then my best friend came around. It's not that. This is a sad ending that became.
It'd be like if Hooper and Quint, like, were the last two that were surviving. It's like, well, if you've read the novel Jaws, that ending has a whole different connotation. But when Childs comes in and they have a conversation, and Childs is drinking the vodka or whiskey or whatever he hands him, it's just like, there's every opportunity to do the horror trope of Jason popping out of the lake, of Freddy poking his knives through a pillow. There's every moment for that to happen, and they don't. They just pan to the burning station, and you are left with your own thoughts. There's no final dead body. It is just a burning station, fade to black, roll credits. And
I love the line too before it fades to black. It's maybe we'll just sit here for a while and see what happens. Like, man, like, what a line to end on.
Well, it's such a good line, but it's also such a nothing line in the best way. Yeah. Like, it's so casual. It would not be Kurt Russell's character to make a big, like, I guess we find, like Shakespearean, like, ending line.
It's not a smile, you son of a bitch. It's not that. It's not that get away from her, you bitch. It's not that final gotcha line. It is, this is how it ends. And that's it. And there's nothing we can do about it. And it was one of those things, like, I remember when I was reading the book Shadowfall, the second book in the Alphabet Squadron trilogy. And that book has a very, I don't like how this is ending at all. This is not what I want. This is not how I want things to go. And I remember closing that book and being like, I am upset.
At the end of Dance with Dragons.
Yeah. And you sit with it for a minute, and then you're like, even though I don't like it, this is what happens. There is a reason behind this. There's meaning behind this. And there was a moment, especially with that book and definitely in The Thing, where it's sometimes, and I'm guilty of it, and I know everyone's guilty of it, is we treat movies like Christmas presents.
Yes.
And we want, even if it's like, even it's not that we want the happy ending. You know, when you watch a horror film, you want the creature to come back for one more kill, like the main character is gonna get it, and we expect that, or maybe we do want the happy ending. And sometimes the ending you get is not the ending you want. It is the ending that happened, and it is not. This is not your movie. This is not your adventure. It's not your story. This is what happened, and it's having to sit with that, and it's uncomfortable in itself, because you're like, whether you rooted for Mac, whether you rooted for Childs, whether you rooted for Quinn or Hooper or whoever, whether you rooted for Ripley, it doesn't matter sometimes. It's just, this is the story that happened. Because I think you put it right. It's like, imagination is 100 times scarier than real life. And so what I think happened between them is going to be way different than what you guys think happened between them. And it's one of those things, like, I'm not against, like, if someone thinks they can write a sequel to something, go for it. If you think you can do a good job, we're always surprised, sometimes by sequels. But I'm like, I do feel if you wrote a sequel to The Thing, it would kind of ruin The Thing. Like that ending is how it ended.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't continue that story. And it's like, it's almost like if you did a sequel to The Thing and it was about, The Thing made it to Manhattan or whatever you want to do, right? It almost still ruins it, because we don't know if The Thing is still there. It could be. It may have blown up. We blew up the spaceship that it was trying to build, but we didn't see it die.
It's something that we were talking about it earlier, like something I experienced with 2010, the year we made contact, where it's like, I didn't need this. And in some aspects, it has like ruined some of the ending of 2001 for me. That was more just like, that happened and I need to like contend with that and my feelings on it. And it's horrifying and scary. And there are answers to some questions and I'm like, oh, okay, like, cool, that's fine. But it's also the not knowing does so much more for it's like the Han Solo problem in Star Wars, like it's you go to the Solo movie and the answers to some of those questions are like, are you kind of lame? Like, some dude just like
it kind of takes the mystique out of it.
Oh, that weapon that you've carried with you forever, just like some guy gave it to you. Okay.
And you're like, yeah, I guess like I should have expected that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Like it's, but to both of your points, and Chase, you just said so many things I literally wrote down, because I was just like, it's like you're left with your own thoughts. The idea, like, because truly, like, you're just the idea of you're left with your own thoughts. I think, as you're saying, it's almost like, and so many creators are, I feel like, afraid to do this, or not afraid, but I think there is a very thin line. Nath and I talk about often about, to me, I always have a struggle between ambiguity and bad storytelling, where I'm like, there is deliberate intentionality of, I ended the story here, not because, like, there are films that I joke around that I'm like, I feel like sometimes, obviously this is not always the case, but it's just something I think is funny, of the writers going, all right, I think we reached the end. Is there any more? I don't know. Probably not. I don't think any more. All right, the ending's there. And then, but like, then there are films like the No Country for Old Men's, the, ones where you're like, no, that's not, as you said, Chase, like, we feel entitled to a better ending. But then you take a minute and you're like, wait a minute. Well, since this is the ending that I have, why? Why is it the ending? And why doesn't that, or does it or doesn't it work with me?
Yeah.
And sometimes because it doesn't work in theory, and doesn't work being a very loose term, you feel as though there is something. There is a reason. Like
it leaves it open enough for you that you can make that interpretation.
And that's, I think, when you get to the crux of what I love about horror, because I think that there's a lot of movies. Like it's very much, it's brilliant. It's just brilliant all around. And so many horror films don't quite leave with this ambiguity. But wrapping up, I think it's a perfect time to turn it over to Cinema a la carte. What do you guys think?
Yeah, sounds good to me. Either of you guys have any final thoughts before we do Cinema a la carte?
No, I think we've covered. I mean, this is a movie you could just almost indefinitely talk about.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many.
I actually could sit on chat with you for hours and talk about it. And
yeah,
likewise.
There's so many aspects to this film. There's so many scenes where, like, we didn't even get to. But like, yeah, I think we've covered like a lot of great ground. And it's just one of those things. Like, it's such an interesting film to me. It's something that, like, my girlfriend Haley, like, does not like horror films, and I'm trying to, like, ease her in. And I showed her both Alien and The Thing, and she liked The Thing, even though it's very gross and she doesn't like the gross stuff. It was just like this. Before horror movies became good movies in a way, The Thing was a good movie that was also a horror movie. Because, like, look, some of my favorite horror films, I am not ashamed to say, are dog water films, overall. Yeah. But they're fun in their own right. They have good scares, et cetera, et cetera. But The Thing really, for me, is it took what Alien did, and I don't want to say it stole from it or anything like that. It changed. It took a lot of inspiration, changed the formula, subverted your expectations, but was still like, we can scare an audience, we can gross out an audience, and we can still tell a good story. We can still have a memorable experience. And like we talked about at the beginning, like, it didn't go over well when it first came out, but now, like you said, it's 2024. We are not the only people talking about The Thing today. Like, people still talk about this movie because of how impactful it is, because of what John Carpenter was able to accomplish with it. So it's why it's like my second favorite horror film of all time, right below Alien.
Amazing.
You gotta risk criticism. You gotta risk failure before, like, in order to like get somewhere new.
Yeah.
But Nev, any thoughts wrapping up?
No, yeah, like I think Chase has covered it really, really well. Like, there's so much that we can go and talk about and dive in depth, and it's great that people are still talking about it. I do need to get from you probably like a list of some iconic horror films too, because I'm also this year I've been diving into it like a lot more and have expanded my palette a lot. But yeah, there's still like so much on there. Like, I haven't seen any other John Carpenter films. Like, I think I've seen one Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm working through all the Screams right now, but I haven't seen a lot of Wes Craven's other stuff. So, like, throw me the list. I'm keen. I'm trying to hit 300 films before the end of the year.
I smell a sub show coming on.
I agree, and I'm fine with this.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say too. Is like, there's gonna be a certain point where we're gonna have to be like, friends who are listening, the 8-hour uncut version of this episode is on Patreon. So
truly,
yeah,
truly,
but, yeah, 5 stars, man, 5 stars. It's so good.
Yep. And well, so going on, we're going to go on to our one of our favorite segments. We always love to wrap up with a little game of Cinema a la carte. As a reminder, this is where we really get to show you the best way to experience this film through the metaphor of food. We have each prepared a menu of our own with this week's film as the main course, along with an entree to start, a wine to pair, and a dessert to complete your journey. And you get to decide which set menu you love the most, but be sure to let us know in the comments. Naf, why don't we start with you? Present for us, the chefs.
The title of my set menu: Body Snatcher. I hardly know her.
Fuck you. That is good. Damn it.
Yeah.
We got to do a super cut of this for the one with the filmies of all of the names.
Yeah. I'm here for it. We are going to start, and so that's not all of my films like Body Snatcher films, but they all kind of fall into this like kind of gross, kind of uncomfortable, not quite sure what's going on. Is there really an answer? Kind of thing. And we start with Jordan Peele's sci-fi masterpiece, Nope. That's where we're gonna kick off our entree. You've got a little bit of that kind of like gross out stuff with, raining blood and guts and the sci-fi elements too, and it's uncomfortable and you have no idea what's going on the whole time, and then by the time you start getting answers, they're not really real answers, it's just weird. And it's wild and uncomfortable, and you're kind of on the edge of your seat all the way through. We get to our main course, which is John Carpenter's The Thing, and we're going to pair that with Annihilation, which has a lot of the
good shit
creepy aspect here. And then to finish up, it's for dessert. I mentioned the film earlier, The Substance. I think it's a really cool way to kind of wrap it all up. It's got a bit of like the grossness, a bit of like the kind of silliness, and it's fun. So those are my picks. It's really simple. We got Nope as our entree. We have The Thing as the main, Annihilation as a wine to pair, and just that wine has been tempered in a barrel that was next to a speaker that was playing your friend calling your name through the roar of a bear to give it some nice vibrations. And then we end up with a substance for dessert. So that's me. Chase, what do you got for us?
So I don't have a title for my course for the evening, but my appetizer is the king of 80s wet horror, Clive Barker's Hellraiser. If you want nastiness, if you want a basic supercut of all the gross things that happen in The Thing with as little stakes as possible, despite having an incredible amount of lore that goes super deep with the Cenobites, Clive Barker's world has been no pun intended, fleshed out quite a lot. And if watching something as gross and wet and slippery as The Thing can get, but you just want more of that, Hellraiser is a great way to start you off. I highly recommend it. And I also, as a bonus, will recommend the 2020 reboot of Hellraiser.
I was just about to ask that. Yeah, I was just looking at the 2022 version. I heard that was actually pretty decent.
Lady Pinhead is pretty incredible. But obviously our main course was 1982 masterpiece of John Carpenter's The Thing. But the drink to pair is John Carpenter's other masterpiece, They Live, which if you don't necessarily need the grossness of The Thing or Hellraiser, what we're going to get with They Live is the fact that They Live is a documentary. And it is a documentary of who you can and cannot trust. It is a film that is soaked and drenched in dripping and metaphor about the corporate elite and who it actually is a human being despite looking like a human being. The conspiracy of They Live is that the wrestler Roddy Piper, who is the star of They Live, came out and said, John Carpenter and I had multiple discussions that this was meant to be as a dramatized documentary, and mysteriously died right after he said those comments.
Really?
Yes.
Shit.
So to pair that, we have to stick with another John Carpenter masterpiece of They Live. Incredible movie, watching it with open eyes. And if you're into conspiracy theories and all of that, it is an incredible movie. But for dessert, as The Thing has two very distinct elements to it, the psychological horror and the gross out horror, the first dessert of choice will be Fede Alvarez's Evil Dead from 2013, which is probably some of the best special effects in body horror to this date. Damien Leone's Terrifier series is also up there, but it's much goofier than Evil Dead from Fede Alvarez. That is a disgusting film every stretch of the way. It is unpleasant to look at. So if you're looking for more of that, you want to go with Fede Alvarez's Evil Dead. But if you need to be disturbed and you need to not trust anyone and you need an ending that will leave your mouth open and make you kind of want to do what happened in the end of the film. Martyrs is another. I hate what I have just watched, and it was pretty gross at times, but now my brain hurts and I don't know if there is a meaning to life anymore.
2008.
So yeah, it's a French film.
I have this in my watch list.
It is brutal. These it's not a spoiler. It is more of a content warning. The second half of that movie is a woman being beaten for about 50 minutes.
Okay.
That'll do it.
And there's a lot of meaning behind it. And it's not just we're beating a woman to beat a woman. It is gross. It is unsettling. There is discussion in there. It is one of those, if you think about Full Metal Jacket as a 1-act, 2-act play.
Got it.
Martyrs is a 1-act, 2-act play where act 1 is insanely gross and terrifying. And act 2 is just gut-wrenchingly sad.
Oh, wow.
And just makes you think about everything. So if you need that more mental draining exercise, watch Martyrs.
Love it.
Damn. Okay.
Love it.
Okay, you got to follow that.
Oh, well, I think I have one of my favorite cinema a la carte titles, which it is based on a true story, which is worst films to eat spaghetti during. This is real. I made the mistake of watching The Thing and having cooked a nice creamy pasta and then immediately was like, maybe not. No, this was the wrong choice. So much texture. My autism couldn't handle it. So I'm going to subject you all to this would be, if paired properly with spaghetti, the worst outing of your life, which is the appetizer is going to be the movie Seven. Mainly because of how it begins. I feel it's appropriate to have a meal that is, I feel it's appropriate. Followed up by the main course of The Thing. And then a wine is Django Unchained, because I thought that both subject matter wise and gore wise, you're probably not going to want to eat spaghetti during this, especially spaghetti with red sauce. And then finally is a dessert of a film that I famously say is one of my favorite films I will never see again, Killing of a Sacred Deer. And Yorgos Lanthimos, follow up to The Lobster, Barry Keoghan's first thing I ever saw him in, and he is terrifying in this movie. I fucking love this movie. Refuse to watch it again. Just because of how deeply disturbed it left me. And there is a great scene where Barry Keoghan is just
spoilers.
He eats spaghetti, and it is a terrifying scene.
Delicious.
Just no context. You won't but when you see it, incredible movies. So once again, that is the worst films to eat spaghetti during, and that is Seven, The Thing, Django Unchained, and Killing of a Sacred Deer. So let us know down in the comments which ones you like best.
Yeah, and thanks again to all the listeners for joining us today. Once again, I'm Naf. You can find me at Seen by Naf. Hopefully not all that often at 4:16 a.m., but nonetheless, always a pleasure to be here. Okay, where can people find you, baby?
Absolutely. And you can find me at Movie Man Opinions pretty much anywhere. And I probably won't respond before 10:16 a.m., but you could certainly try. I don't respond much after that either, but nonetheless, it is the case.
A bad texter.
Notoriously a bad texter. It's not that I don't care. It's just that I forget. And Chase, where can people find you?
You can mostly find me on TikTok at Forward Into the Black, where I mostly talk about Star Wars and video games and stuff like that. But I'm also on the Pod Ones podcast here and there, talking more about Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and all sorts of fun things. We also watched Alien and Terrifier 2 with our friend Bale in the UK, who's very new to horror films. So I figured I'd throw him in the deep end, with a couple of those movies.
I watched the first Terrifier the other night. I'm watching the second one this weekend, and we're gonna go watch the third one in theaters.
Third one, they're all great. They're all so good.
So exciting.
It is one of those. The Terrifier series is the only series where I follow the people on social media, because each cast member's social media outlet is wildly entertaining to watch.
Oh, God, I love it.
Amazing.
David Howard Thornton is a sweetest little angel, and the fact that he plays Art the Clown is so funny.
I'm really keen for that. But definitely, get me a list of some of the must-watch. I want to work through them as well. Just a final reminder to listeners that you can find all the links to our individual pages in the descriptions below. There's even a Google form you can fill out. There's a specific creator or film that you'd love to see on the podcast. And you can find One With The Films on Instagram and TikTok and all your favorite podcasting platforms of choice. But for now, as promised, stick around and feast your eyes on the next film and guest for the weekly watch list.
Hello, One With The Film fans. It's me. You know, you might recognize me, Johnny, Keegan's more seasoned substitute while he was away, gallivanting about, being himself. Anyways, Naf has told me that I'm here today to reveal to you guys the next guest for One With The Films. The weird part is he told me he inseminated it in me. And I didn't understand him when he told me this, but I'm assuming that's what the egg was about when it popped out of me this morning. I don't know how you did it, Naf. Good job, I guess. I genuinely don't know. Anyways, let's find out who it is. But also, Naf, never put an egg in me again, okay? Anyways, let's take a look here. It's me, and we're talking about Chef. Cool. But again, Naf, you kind of just told me, didn't need to put the egg in me. We'll talk about this later when we're on next week, okay? Anyways, until then, catch you guys later.